Synth TV.
Hey everybody, CatSynth TV, and we're here with Big Merp to present the new Chroma from Cherry Audio. It's a recreation of the powerful and rare Chroma analog polyphonic synthesizer from Rhodes. We'll break down all the features of this incredibly complex instrument for you. But first, a bit of history. The Chroma was designed and created by ARP in 1981. It had many of the features found in other polyphonic analog synthesizers of the time, but also had some unique and complex features. In particular, it had the ability to reconfigure its oscillator, filter, and VCA signal paths, opening up a wider variety of sound possibilities usually associated with modular synthesizers. Unfortunately, before this amazingly powerful instrument was released, ARP filed for bankruptcy. Fortunately, Rhodes purchased the production rights and hired much of the original team that developed it and released the Rhodes Chroma in 1982. Now, although the Chroma was an incredibly flexible instrument, it was challenging to program because it had such a large parameter set but limited user interface. Parameters were selected one at a time using the various front panel membrane buttons and then edited with a single slider and small LED display. Rhodes did release a version called the Expander that had the same features minus the keyboard. And they also released a simpler follow-on instrument called the Chroma Polaris. That's one I'm intimately familiar with, but that's a story for another time. The Cherry Audio Chroma recreates the look and feel of the original. You can see all the colorful buttons here, as well as the dark panels and wood finishing. Very nice. Now, of course, there are some significant differences that take advantage of a modern computer UI. On the original, the buttons would just select a parameter, which you would then modify using the single data slider. But here, each of the buttons manipulates its own parameter directly. Some of them are numerical that you can move up and down, while others are menus that you can choose from. This goes for the patch control as well. The Chroma has two independent voices per note. Each has an oscillator, filter, and amplifier. And one of the unique features is that you can combine them in many different ways. You can see the current path topology in this graphic over here, and if you tap on it, you get to choose from a bunch of different options. For the moment, we're just going to go single layer, which has a single oscillator, filter, and amp in the usual subtractive synthesizer mode. Okay, let's start with the oscillator. The oscillator has several controls for pitch as well as the wave shape. There are 4 different independent waveforms for the oscillator: sawtooth, pulse, pink noise, and white noise. And yes, this is not a typo. It's actually written sawtooth. When the width is set to 0, you get a normal sawtooth sound. However, if you increase the width, it adds more harmonics for a richer sound. And when you set to 50, essentially you get a sawtooth an octave higher. Now, of course, you can modulate this. We can use the mod select here, and I am going to select sweep A. Now, sweep is essentially the Chroma term for an LFO. We have a rate setting, we have a variety of waveforms to choose from, and we have different modulation options. So let's set this a bit slower, move this to 50. Not really getting much of anything, and that is because the sweep actually has an amplitude modulation set to the mod wheel. So if we turn up the mod wheel, we can hear the sweep. But of course, we also hear pitch modulation because sweep is being set to the pitch modulation over here. Let's turn that off. Now, of course, we can do this with the pulse wave as well. In this case, the width control has its traditional meaning. It modifies the duty cycle. Notice that when you set the pulse width to 0 or 100, you essentially get a pulse width of 0, which means you don't hear much of anything at all. Now, of course, we can set this modulation up again. bring up the rate a bit. Nice. Of course, we also have noise sources. Pink noise. And white noise. Let's go back to the pulse. Now, if we look at the pitch section, we have the usual controls for coarse and fine tuning. Now, we also have 3 different pitch modulations. At first, that may seem a little excessive, but each of these controls a different range. So the first one is for fine pitch control. So if we turn this back on to sweep A, you kind of get a vibrato. Here's a good opportunity to see some of the other waveforms. We have sine, which we've been using. We actually have a cosine, which kind of sounds the same, but it's a different phase. We have a half sine. Some interesting uses for that, perhaps. And we also have different preset patterns. Let's go back to triangle. Now, if we turn this off, we can see that if we go to this middle range here, it's a much wider pitch modulation. And finally, the last one spans several octaves. We'll see how that comes in handy later. All right, now let's take a look at the filter section. This is your basic 12 dB resonant filter. In fact, it uses the same Curtis chip that was popular in a lot of synthesizers of the time. It has high pass and low pass modes. Let's keep it in low pass for the moment. We can crank up the resonance a bit. We can crank the resonance all the way up, 'cause you know I love to do that. You can hear that it starts to self-oscillate. In fact, if I turn the width down to 0 so that we don't hear the main oscillator, we're hearing just the self-oscillation of the filter. There's even a trick that allows us to play notes with it from the keyboard. If we take one of the modulation inputs and set it to keyboard glide A, this allows us to do pitch tracking of the filter. Now, if we set it to 50, we should be able to get normal pitches. Okay, enough of that mashugana. Let's set it back to a civilized level. Now we can add up to 3 different modulations for the filter. Let's leave the filter tracking on, and I am going to bring in controller 1. Controller 1 is one of the 4 levers over here. We have the standard pitch and mod controls. We also have 2 additional sliders, which we can set to any MIDI source we want. Right now, I have controller 1 set to my expression pedal, so I can tap that up and down. And so if I use that here and bring that all the way down, now we can add back in the sweep. Let's try some of these other ones here. Let's try one of these patterns. You can hear that the LFO is a little bit janky there. Let's set it to single key sync. There, much better. Of course, rather than LFO, one of the things we'll want to use here is an envelope, so let's go to envelope 1A. Envelopes on the Chroma are a little bit different than we're used to. It doesn't have a sustain, it only has an attack and decay mode. Essentially, when decay is set to 100, it behaves like an ordinary sustain. Let's increase the attack a bit and take the decay down. Let's bring those back up a little bit. All right. Now, of course, we also have the high pass mode. I can control that a little bit with my foot pedal. And of course, with the envelope as well, probably give it a negative. Let's bring it back to low pass. And finally, we have a VCA, which is called amp in the patch configuration and volume in the control section. We have modulation slots which can be assigned to various envelopes. Right now we are set to using envelope 2A, which is right here. So if we increase the attack a little bit, we can assign controller 1 to create a volume pedal. Now, one thing we notice is that we don't have a control for velocity, which seems kind of strange. If you want to get velocity control, it's actually found in the envelope with this amp touch control. This will modulate the amplitude of the envelope based on velocity. Set it to medium low. I find medium works well for my playing style. All right, so let's save what we have here so far. And reset. Now, so far we've spent quite a bit of time looking at just a single layer. But as we mentioned, the Chroma has a lot of different path configurations. Now, we're not going to look at all of them, but I will show you a good subset that will help you understand them all. Now, before we continue, I'd like to invite you to please support this channel so that we may bring you more content like this regularly. Links to our merch store, Patreon, and Ko-Fi are in the description below. Okay, let's get back to it and start with dual layers. This is 2 parallel voices, each with an oscillator, filter, and amp. You'll see that now these buttons have lit up, so we can edit layer A or layer B. Orange indicates which layer you are currently editing. Let's edit A a little bit here. We'll keep it on sawtooth. We'll change the width a little bit. We'll give it just a touch of width modulation. Solo out layer A. Now let's go to layer B. Now, one thing I recommend is changing the pitch ever so slightly. Give yourself a fatter sound. We can independently control the volume of each voice. We're going to change this to a pulse. We solo that out. Unsolo layer B. But of course, we can also change the filters independently. So for example, on layer B, let's bring this down, crank the resonance up, and give it a little bit of a sweep as well. use controller 1 to bring voice B in and out. So if we go back and unsolo, crank up the resonance, use a pattern on sweep B, now let's go back to voice A and adjust the filter. So we want to give it an envelope. Let's set this to single key sync again. Now you can also edit both voices at the same time. Let's set the amplitude envelopes of both at once. Set touch to medium. Now let's go back to B, and I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do here. Let's turn that to envelope 2A, and we're going to make envelope attack very quick and decay very quick here, and set the waveform to pink noise. Now it's a little strong, so let's turn the volume of B down a little bit. Alright, let's reset again. Now notice that because we're back in single mode, these buttons have been disabled again. Let's take a look at dual layers plus oscillator sync. Now this is similar to the dual layer we just looked at, but it also establishes a hard sync between oscillators B and A. So that means that if we go to edit B now and we change the pitch, we're going to get that classic sync sound. If you want it to be a little more pronounced, turn down the volume of A. Now, of course, the thing you want to do with this is set up a sweep. So let's go to the wide pitch modulation and assign envelope 1B. And make both the attack and decay long. Maybe a little bit too much. Let's dial it back a little bit. Shorten the attack for a descending sync sweep. Maybe dial it back just a little bit. Yeah, we're starting to get that classic Gary Newman sync bass. Now, if we want to really dial it in, what we can do is change this to a pulse wave. And we can start to also use the filter here. Let's use envelope 2B for that. Nice, let's save that. All right, let's reset again. And this time let's look at dual plus ring mod. In this mode, oscillator A and B are combined into a ring modulator effect that then is fed into filter A and amp A, while oscillator B is fed directly into filter B and amp B. Now it's important to note that with ring modulation, both oscillators are set to pulse regardless of setting. So I'm going to edit A and B and set their widths to 50. And now I can use the frequency of B to get that ring mod tone. Now if we want to hear just the ring modulator, turn down the volume on B. Assign control 1, our foot pedal, to adjust oscillator B frequency. Kind of get this really sort of inharmonic bell sound. This is a good opportunity to go to amp A and increase the release value. Now we can soften it a little bit by bringing down the filter. That sound may be an acquired taste for some, but I like it, so I'm going to save this one as well. All right, let's reset again. And now we're going to take a look at Filter FM. In this configuration, Voice B modifies the cutoff frequency of Filter A. Let's start by turning Voice B down. Now let's bring Voice B back in. We can hear a bit of modulation there. Now let's go to Voice B Edit and start to change its frequency. We're starting to hear some pretty wild FM type sounds. Let's try to dial in something which is a little bit more stable. All right, that kind of sounds cool. Now, of course, one thing about this particular FM is that it's not just oscillator B that's modulating filter A, but we also have filter B involved, so we can get an even more complex FM arrangement. All right, let's bring in sweep B. Let's slow it down a bit. And now let's look at parallel filters. In this mode, both oscillators feed into both filters. So we can set up some more complex filter types this way. First, let's go to oscillator A, leave it as is. Oscillator B, let's detune it a little bit. Maybe give it a little width as well. And now for filter A, we're going to leave it as low pass. And for filter B, we're going to set it to high pass. So we're going to have both oscillators feeding into a high pass filter and a low pass filter simultaneously. Now what we're going to do is hit Edit A plus B so that we're editing the parameters of both at the same time. So this means that if I go to the cutoff, it's going to affect both the high pass filter and the low pass filter simultaneously. kind of a cool, phasey sort of effect. We can modulate that. Let's assign our foot controller and set it all the way negative. We can automate that like a real phaser by going to sweep B on both of those, setting this really nice and low, and bringing up the depth a bit. In this case, we probably want to use the offset sign so that we're only going in one direction from the cutoff frequency and not in both. Nice. Let's save that one too. We can also combine different patterns. For example, we can have parallel filters together with oscillator sync. So we still have our parallel filter effect. Oscillator B, we can now get the sync effect as well. So once again, we can set envelope 1B like way up. Pretty neat, very expressive sound. Let's save that too. All right, reset again. Now let's take a look at series filter mode. In this mode, we have oscillators A and B first feed into filter A and then into filter B. Now, if we edit filter A and B at the same time, one thing we can do is use this to create a steeper 24 dB filter. But another interesting thing to do is to go to B, change that back to high pass again, and now we essentially have a band pass filter. Pretty cool, but we can also modulate the high pass and low pass filters separately. Let's go to B, and let's set that to sweep B. Add a little bit of modulation in. Patterns. We can do the same thing with A. Don't forget to make sure to turn the pitch modulation off. We have this interesting little filter rhythm going. All right, let's go back to our parallel filters sound. And now let's take a look at the effects section. Here you can find your normal complement of effects: distortion, phaser, flanger chorus, delay, and reverb, as well as an EQ. Now the EQ is quite interesting because it was modeled after the actual EQ on the original Chroma. Let's take a listen to it now. There, that's a good level. We have a phaser, which is actually kind of interesting with this one because we already have the phasery effect. So what happens if we double it up? Let's try a 6-stage phaser. Now that's really cool. We get this sort of double phaser with this kind of swirling effect all around us. I think that could use a little bit of chorus. Nice. Now let's add a little bit of reverb to this. I'm going to go to the spring reverb. Give it a bit of a longer decay. Let's save this one. Now let's go back to our ring mod sound that we saved earlier. Let's go to the effects section on this one, dial in a bit of EQ. Kind of softens it up a little bit. Let's add a little bit of chorus. Let's try the flange actually. Wow, that's really kind of cool and atonal. Maybe we'll put a little bit of delay on it. Maybe we'll try a tape. Nice. And finally add a little bit of reverb. Let's go for Cherry Audio's Galactic Reverb. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Let's save that again too. Okay, now that we've seen most of the features of the Chroma, let's see how they are put to use in a few of the factory presets. We hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Cherry Audio Chroma. To find out more, please visit cherryaudio.com and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.